Tonight on 24, Tehran responds to the first round of U.S. negotiations during Netanyahu's Washington trip. Israel's prime minister has said the fate of the Islamic Republic is the main focus of his discussion with Trump. As the number of U.S. stealth fighters in the Middle East increases, U.S. media report that Patriot and THAAD air defense systems around Iran have been reinforced. And the U.S.'s maximum pressure to cut off the Islamic Republic's oil revenue. The Kepler Institute has reported a drop in China's purchase of Iranian oil to about 1 million barrels per day.
From Iran International, it's 24 with Fardad Farahzad.
Hello and good evening to Iran International viewers in Iran and around the world. Moments ago, the U.S. president said in a phone interview with Israel's Channel 12 that if an agreement with Iran isn't possible, the U.S. will be forced to take harsh action against the Islamic Republic. He said the issue of Iran's missiles must also be included in any potential agreement. Meanwhile, the Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council has met with officials in Oman. Islamic Republic media initially said Ali Larijani conveyed an important message to Oman, but Iranian state television later reported that Oman's foreign minister delivered a letter to Larijani. Details of the content of the meetings have not been announced, and it's said that Larijani headed to Qatar after Oman. This comes as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is also en route to the U.S. Netanyahu has stated that the main focus of his discussion at the White House is the Islamic Republic, and CNN has also announced that Netanyahu is expected to talk with Trump about potential military options against Iran. At this very moment, as we speak, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Wings of Zion plane is flying over the Pacific Ocean towards the U.S. Our correspondent, Rabak Sagi, is also on that flight with several other journalists, and just moments ago sent this short report.
Benjamin Netanyahu's flight to Washington is still underway. I'm reporting from the Israeli government plane carrying him to Washington. This is the first time an Iranian journalist has been allowed to accompany him on the Wings of Zion plane, the Israeli Prime Minister's private jet, and perhaps this indicates the significance and sensitivity of the Iran issue for Israel. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is scheduled to meet with Donald Trump tomorrow during his ongoing diplomatic trip. Their discussion aims to clarify face-to-face the essential security concerns that serve as definitive red lines for the state of Israel. Alongside him, Mike Huckabee, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, is also accompanying Benjamin Netanyahu on this trip. Mike Huckabee has positioned himself as a staunch opponent of diplomatic engagement with the Islamic Republic, aggressively advocating for the regime's total overthrow. Whether his hawkish perspective will actually shape the strategic dialogue during the high-stakes meeting between Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump is a question that will only be answered tomorrow. Babik Sagi, the Wings of Zion plane in the sky.
I want to correct myself. I mistakenly said the Pacific, but it is actually the Atlantic Ocean that the Wings of Zion plane is currently flying over as it heads towards Washington, D.C. Meanwhile, the U.S. Air Force and Space magazine says more U.S. stealth fighters arrived in the Middle East yesterday. According to this report, 3 KC-135 refueling aircraft are also accompanying these fighters. Simultaneously, the U.S. has increased Patriot and THAAD air defense deployments across several Middle Eastern countries, including Jordan and Saudi Arabia. Our correspondent Samira Karai is with us from the U.S. State Department. Samira, first and foremost, I want to address the news that just broke moments ago. The conversation the U.S. president had with Israel's Channel 12, and what seems to draw attention is his insistence that if an agreement with Tehran does happen, the issue of missiles must definitely be included in it.
Fardad, while Mr. Trump previously stated the missile issue concerns the U.S., a recent flood of news from Israeli media indicates that Mr. Netanyahu wants to remind him about this critical matter, and to say, this is our red line, don't you dare talk to the Iranians without bringing up missiles. And now we're seeing Mr. Trump, the same position he really had in recent months, he also spoke about it publicly in the last week of the year. He said said the same thing in an interview with Israel's Channel 12 and the news website Axios. Their shared reporter Barak Ravid spoke with him by phone and said exactly this. And he said that regarding enrichment and the nuclear issue, any agreement I want to make, well, of course, I'll talk about nuclear matters. He says you don't even need to have common sense to understand that I will include the nuclear discussion in the agreement. He says it is feasible to discuss the missile arsenal with the Islamic Republic. He focused on the arsenal and accumulation rather than range, though these details are secondary. While many assume Mr. Netanyahu is visiting to discuss missile disagreements, the key point is Mr. Trump's declaration that we will negotiate with the Islamic Republic regarding missiles. He sees raising that discussion in the talks as feasible. Another key point is Netanyahu's trip, moved up a week to February 11th, triggering significant speculation about the timing and reasons for the change. Some say he wants to avoid Washington next Thursday because of Wednesday's peace delegation meeting. Mr. Trump says in this interview that due to his own situation and daily scheduling, he didn't have time next week, so Netanyahu is coming a week earlier. This was also one of the mysteries that Mr. Trump seems to have solved. Larijani's trip is also very important. The Axios report that was prepared covers Larijani's trip alongside Netanyahu's trip, and Mr. Larijani was in Muscat, Oman today and is scheduled to go to Qatar tomorrow. Fardad, Netanyahu spoke about his U.S. trip at the plane's steps. Let's listen to that part, then we'll talk more about Larijani.
I am now heading to the United States for the 7th time to meet with President Trump since his election for a second term. These issues demonstrate the unique closeness of our exceptional relationship with the United States. Both my personal relationship with the President and the relationship of the Israeli government with the United States are unprecedented in our history. During this trip, we will discuss Gaza and the region, but first and foremost, negotiations with Iran. I will present my views on vital negotiation principles to the President. In my view, these principles are vital for Israel and anyone seeking peace and security in the Middle East.
Fardad presented the view that Mr. Netanyahu's current remarks might raise a concern. Mr. Trump, in an interview with Axios, interestingly notes that Benjamin Netanyahu shouldn't worry, as there is no cause for concern, because he, like me, seeks a good deal. Since Mr. Trump entered the White House, we haven't seen him take actions conflicting with Benjamin Netanyahu's long-term desires and the bigger picture. But let's get to the discussion about Larijani, because that trip was also important, especially that folder or that letter and that paper you also mentioned. It was controversial. The way it was covered in Iranian media initially said that it was the Islamic Republic that entered Oman with a letter. It became clear that al-Busaidi delivered this to Mr. Larijani. However, its appearance differed from the letter Shinzo Abe once brought to Ali Khamenei on Trump's behalf. While that was clearly an envelope, this particular item appears to be a plastic folder. While it remains unclear what is inside, Mr. Larijani travels to Qatar tomorrow. Axios reports he will convey the Islamic Republic's positions to the Qatari side before the likely second round next week. Now, the speculation is whether that folder contained the United States demands. It was given to Larijani today, and tomorrow Larijani is supposed to give the answers to the Qatari side. Netanyahu will also meet at the White House tomorrow, and they will decide whether negotiations will be held in Muscat next week, depending on Larijani's answer.
Thank you. سمیرا درایی سکرتاریا از وزارت خارجه آمریکا در واشنگتن دی سی. Shakriya Barados, researcher of international security and foreign policy from Washington, and Mayor Javed Danfar, analyst of Israeli affairs from Tel Aviv, are with us. Thank you both. Ms. Barados, it seems there's an ocean of distance between the Islamic Republic's view and the American side. In the interview that was broadcast minutes ago, the part where Mr. Trump spoke with Israel's Channel 12, he said that the nuclear issue is already a given and Iran's missile program must also be included in any potential agreement. This is while we hear in Tehran that even regarding the nuclear program, they say at best we might slightly dilute enrichment.
Look, regarding the Islamic Republic, well, the Islamic Republic is trying by any means necessary to convince Trump to accept what it wants to put on the table. But the thing is, well, what Trump has put on the table, the conditions Trump has put on the table for the Islamic Republic means surrender. And it knows this, in my opinion. The Islamic Republic is playing a game, knowing that Trump doesn't want to start a war. This was also true in the 12-day war. Trump didn't want to start a war. And they know that if a war does start, it will be a limited war. In my opinion, the Islamic Republic is seeking an agreement with Trump, knowing he will not enter a long-term war. Another important actor here is Israel, and Israel wants a different agreement. In my opinion, Trump seeks a short-term deal so he can say, "I won," and claim he reached an agreement with the Islamic Republic. Israel seeks a long-term agreement, potentially with a faction inside the system. We should revisit this topic later to discuss if Israel will forge such an internal deal. The question remains whether the project Netanyahu is presenting to Trump, even if a limited attack, will help this group come to power. Trump's project differs from Netanyahu's as his administration lacks a specific plan for Iran's future government following any strike, even if today's action remains limited. This is where, in my opinion, all this back and forth, these talks, this confusion exists precisely about what will happen after a limited attack. Because as I said, it won't be a long-term attack. It will be a short-term and limited attack. Now, after a limited attack, who will come to power and who will remain in power? This is the project that, in my opinion, Netanyahu is bringing to Trump, because the Trump administration hasn't yet reached a conclusion on this project, and the Islamic Republic, knowing this reality, is trying by any means necessary to prevent Netanyahu's plan from coming to the table, and instead pursued Trump's plan and the same agreement they want to make. And in my opinion, Larijani's trip also precisely indicates that the Islamic Republic wants to reach an agreement with Trump by any means necessary.
Mr. Javed Danfar, in your opinion, with what hope is Netanyahu coming to Washington?
Look, one of the questions that needs to be asked is that about 10 days ago, Mr. Jared Kushner and Mr. Steve Witkoff were in Israel. Mr. Netanyahu met with them and raised the issues that are important to Israel. So, what's the point of Mr. Netanyahu traveling to America right now? One hypothesis in Israel is that he isn't sure Mr. Kushner and Mr. Witkoff will convey his views to Mr. Trump with the same dedication Mr. Netanyahu told them. That is why Netanyahu must speak to Trump and voice Israel's concerns. Mr. Kushner and Mr. Witkoff strongly disagreed with Mr. Netanyahu regarding the Gaza issue and were particularly angered by his attacks on Qatar. Mr. Netanyahu went to America because disagreements with Mr. Wickoff and Mr. Kushner seemingly made him feel he needed to personally address the issues that are critical for Israel. And we all know what those are: the missile issue, the nuclear program issue, and the issue of Iran's proxy groups. So there's another issue I should mention. Actually, two other issues, but I'll briefly touch on them. One is that we're now heading into an election year, which is very important for Mr. Netanyahu. In all his interviews, he says, "This is the 7th time I'm meeting with Mr. Trump," and he repeats the 7th time every time because of the election issue. And another issue is this Gaza peace delegation, which could actually end up being costly for Mr. Netanyahu because Turkey and Qatar are on that delegation. But to, change the subject, he talks about Iran so that the issue of the Gaza peace delegation isn't discussed.
Ms. Broaddus, one of the ambiguities seems to be the extent of cooperation between America and Israel. Mr. Javidanfar just mentioned some of the disagreements that, for example, Jared Kushner and Wyckoff have with Netanyahu. Right before Mr. Netanyahu's flight, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, told reporters that no, the United States and Israel are actually very aligned and in agreement regarding Iran. But then, for example, there was a report yesterday, you probably saw it, where Hakan Fidan, the Turkish foreign minister, said in an interview that a few hours before the Israeli attack on Iran in that 12-day war, the U.S. Secretary of State, Mr. Marco Rubio, called him and told him to tell the Iranian side that something was going to happen. Many are confused as to how an ally like Israel could want to attack Iran, and then the American side would want to give a signal to Iran. How can all these ambiguities be translated?
This confirms my point. America's wishes differ from Israel's. Hakan Fidan's statement is very important, even if the American side hasn't confirmed or denied it yet. Fidan is making a significant claim that the U.S. contacted him to inform officials of the Islamic Republic. This exactly means the difference between America's goals and Israel's goals, which, the Islamic Republic has often tried to show that no, the Trump administration or Israel, the Israeli lobby, influences Trump's decisions. If this is true, it shows that their goals are completely different. Trump's strategy has always followed a consistent pattern seen clearly regarding the Gaza issue. He begins with intense pressure and extreme demands, such as suggesting the population leave. However, he eventually retreats from this rhetoric to settle for a limited, small agreement, which he then declares to be a significant short-term victory. But the policy Netanyahu has, the policy that, Israel has, in my opinion, Israel is looking at the circles around it, meaning those circles that are threatening Israel's security. Well, we know it was in the mid-90s that Iran was added to this circle. Until the 90s, Iran wasn't part of those circles of threat to Israel. In my opinion, the security threats surrounding Israel have expanded beyond just the Islamic Republic of Iran. Syria, Turkey, and Qatar are now part of this circle. That is why Israel is insisting that all its demands be met in any negotiations. However, I believe that reaching this kind of agreement with the Islamic Republic in its current form is not possible because, the Islamic Republic's foundation, its very basis, is fighting Israel. So Israel is trying to push a project that is against Trump's project, a result that the Trump administration doesn't have. What does it want to do? After this attack, if it happens, it wants to put its project, in my opinion, that proposal on the table. And we know with all the security problems that exist, Netanyahu wants to personally present that proposal or that project he's worked on for years. In my opinion, this is a project that Israel has for after Khamenei, not after the Islamic Republic, but after Khamenei. And it has worked on it for years inside Iran. And I refer to the influence that Israel has within the structure of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. That's why, in my opinion, a group or individuals that Israel wants to come to power after Khamenei are currently in contact with Israel within the IRGC. And Israel is trying to use all groups to achieve the outcome it desires. In my opinion, the only actor opposing both Trump's and Netanyahu's plans is the people of Iran. It is very difficult for them to accept the agreements Israel or Trump want simply because over 30,000 people have been killed. If we consider the families of these victims, a vast population in Iran is now against any compromise or agreement with this regime. In my opinion, the Iranian people must ensure agreements by Israel and Trump align with their wishes rather than being used as tools. Unfortunately, the people have not yet gained the power to do so.
During the discussion, you're also seeing live images from the White House. Caroline Lewis, the White House spokesperson, is speaking. One of our ears is tuned to Washington. As soon as they say anything about Iran, we will definitely relay it to you. Mr. Javidanfar, it is clear that there are many intricacies and disagreements. These are realities in this matter. Putting aside the disagreements between Israel and America, the influential role played by Turkey, Qatar, the UAE, and other regional countries is no secret to anyone. But when you put it on these two sides of the scale, it seems that the side of disagreements between Iran and America is much deeper. Isn't that right? Whether it's about the nuclear issue, or the proxy groups, or the missile program, or the unprecedented killing of protesters whom Mr. Trump had promised to help.
Absolutely. First of all, if you'll allow me, I don't accept Mr. Hakan Fidan's statements, meaning what he's saying is that Mr. Marco Rubio came and told him something that is truly a very big military secret. Mr. Rubio knows that anything he tells Mr. Hakan Fidan can be relayed to the Iranians hours before an attack, which would lead to saving many leaders of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps.
He said, he told me to tell the Iranian side, as the Turkish foreign minister claims. Marco Rubio told me to tell the Iranian side that anything could happen in the next few hours.
Meaning Mr. Marco Rubio didn't think he was going to save the lives of those in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. I think what Mr. Hakan Fidan is saying is untrue. And now let's put this other issue aside. Look, the thing is, it really depends on Mr. Khamenei, on Ali Khamenei, what he wants to do. What kind of Iran he really wants to deliver to the people of Iran in the future. On one hand, my view is that it's very important we consider the people of Iran. It's very important that in any agreement made, we consider the interests of the people of Iran. This is vital, but I'm telling you, Mr. Trump isn't going to do something like that. For Mr. Trump, the most important issue is his own interest. Whether it is Mr. Netanyahu, and I remain a big critic of his, as you know, or the opposition, all of us in Israel want the Velayat Ifaqi to end and for the regime to be overthrown completely. But Mr. Trump will never come and do this because, well, it's not his priority. So the only hope for Israel is that at least in a future agreement, they take these nuclear and missile capabilities away from the Islamic Republic.
Thank you to both of you. Mayor Javidanfar, analyst of Israeli affairs, and Shukri Baradust, a researcher of international security and foreign policy from Washington. As the U.S. intensifies its maximum pressure policy to block exports from the Islamic Republic, analytics firm Kepler has reported a decline in China's purchases of Iranian oil. According to Kepler's data, in January, the amount of Chinese oil purchases from Iran drops to around 1 million barrels per day. This is while oil loading from Iran in January was reported at about 1.3 million barrels per day, which has led to an increase in Iran's floating oil reserves to 170 to 190 million barrels. This reduction in purchases comes as following the recent seizure of 3 tankers linked to the transfer of sanctioned Iranian oil by India. Reports have emerged of increased U.S. pressure on India to halt its purchases of oil and petroleum products from the Islamic Republic. Bian Maliki, former head of the Office of Sanctions Targeting at the U.S. Department of Treasury, is with us from Washington. Mr. Maliki, in these circumstances that smell like war, how much do you think these sanctions, already pressuring the Islamic Republic, have affected and will affect Iran's oil exports to China?
Thanks, Farazjan. Look, first, before I answer your question, let me clarify something regarding the actual statistics of Iran's oil exports. Look, there are 2 numbers here that we need to pay attention to. One is the oil that's actually loaded onto tankers at terminals in Iran, and the oil that reaches China or India and to the buyers. The number related to loaded oil, that might just stay high. Well, because Iran doesn't want to lower its oil extraction. That would be very costly for them if they were to lower oil extraction. That's why it starts and continues to put oil on tankers and move it out of Iran. This is what I saw in my experience in 2019 and 2020, how much they were sending oil out, actually using their tankers as storage for the oil. We must focus on oil reaching buyers in China and now India, which has dropped very low. We face military exclusivity in waters far from Iran. This issue also has a big impact alongside the sanctions. Buyers of Iranian oil in China, most of whom are small refineries, make their purchasing decisions based on 2 key factors. One is how much they can trust that the oil will be delivered to them. Look, they can't just shut down their refineries and wait for the oil to arrive. They need to trust that the oil will reach them so they can continue operations. Another factor is how much discount they can get up front. These types of refineries, the small oil refineries in China, have never been in good financial shape. They haven't paid their taxes, haven't paid proper taxes. They really count on discounts. Now, what the U.S. government has added to this decision-making are very severe sanctions. Well, they now actually face the risk of being sanctioned. And actually, they can't even count on oil delivery because of that U.S. military presence. You saw the U.S. Department of Transportation, I think it was just 2 days ago, actually issued a warning for tankers flying U.S. and Western country flags in the Persian Gulf to stay away from Iranian waters. Well, these messages, that U.S. military presence, this can somewhat affect buyers' decision-making. There's the risk of sanctions that could affect them, and more importantly, Venezuelan oil is now entering the market, and that oil might, somewhat replace Iranian oil. And the last point is that buyers seeking discounted oil can rely more on Russian oil reaching them than Iranian oil.
This Venezuela you mentioned is noteworthy. How much of the experience that happened in Venezuela can be used to guess what fate awaits Iranian oil?
Look, Venezuela is a very close parallel. If something happened regarding U.S. military presence, note that the Justice Department actually seized tankers carrying Venezuelan oil. In 2019 and 2020, we saw how Justice Department seizures affected buyers of Iranian oil. For those involved in transportation, the risk became so high that they refused to get involved. The threat of seizure makes handling this oil too dangerous. This was in Venezuela, alongside U.S. military and sanctions. We are seeing this same situation happening in Iran now, but the difference is that the Treasury Department has issued licenses allowing American companies to export Venezuelan oil. This development could have a very effective impact on the sanctions against Iran. Because Venezuelan oil is going out into the market anyway, refineries can access it. The specific oil type allows them to switch from Iranian to Venezuelan supplies. While costly, we saw them switch from Venezuelan to Iranian oil in January, and I believe they will now switch back to Venezuelan or Russian oil.
Now, an interesting point about Venezuela that Marco Rubio, the U.S. Secretary of State, was saying is that a lot of these oil revenues are now going into Qatari banks for fear of the creditors that the Venezuelans have. I want to ask you this, too. We know a portion of Iran's oil revenue is received by intermediaries abroad, like Syrian or trustee companies. It seems that even the financial transfer of these funds back into the country is now facing a serious crisis.
Look, I think that is a very good question. This money transfer to Iran means the transfer of oil revenue. This remains Iran's fundamental problem. That problem is even much more important than them being able to get the oil to the buyer. During these past years, what Iran has really relied on is the money that continues to arrive. That oil revenue that in fact reaches them in China, they keep it in China. They don't bring this money into the banking system so that it might, be seized somewhere. They keep it in China, and they add from that money, well, to carry out some imports. They have smaller exports like petrochemicals and oil, where revenue comes via Chinese and Indian banking systems to reach around Iran, to pay for Iran's remaining imports. This is somewhat, a problem Iran has always had. When that money comes out, it's either seized very quickly because of, the compliance systems that exist in banks that in fact want to prevent sanctions, or because many people in the middle want to pocket the money. They want to take a commission, and a lot of this money, as you saw, never reached Iran, like gentlemen such as Zanjani, who took this oil to sell. Ultimately, they did not manage to bring the money that was expected of them either. But now I think they're reaching a point, because they can't bring down oil extraction. It will end up being very costly for them. They're going back to the same years of 2018, 2019, or before that, before the JCPOA, when they were even willing for someone to come and take the oil. And then if they could bring the money later, they would, which unfortunately much of that never returned.
Thank you. Miad Maliki, former head of the Office of Sanctions Targeting at the U.S. Treasury Department from Washington. Turkey's foreign minister has warned that if Iran acquires nuclear weapons, Ankara might also enter this nuclear arms race. Hakan Fidan, who was speaking with CNN Turk, said such a scenario could put regional countries under pressure and alter the security balance of the Middle East. According to Fidan, the idea that U.S. or Israeli airstrikes could lead to regime change in Iran is, according to him, a pipe dream, and he warned that relying on a military option has unpredictable consequences for the region. Middle East analyst Ali Sadrazadeh joins us from Frankfurt. Mr. Sadrazadeh, if some of these Arab countries in the Persian Gulf region, like the Saudis, say this, it might be easier to understand. Why do you think Turkey makes such a statement? A country that's a NATO member itself hosts American nuclear weapons. Why should they be pursuing nuclear competition?
I don't think his statement was very serious, because he said if Iran gets the atomic bomb, and just now, I read news that Trump told Mr. Fidan, you can be sure Iran will never get the atomic bomb. So this premise that Mr. Fidan put forward is practically not relevant. Therefore, Mr. Fidan himself, in this interview he had with CNN Turk, said that we are signatories to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. We are committed. meaning, therefore, we won't undertake such an action without the world's knowledge. Besides, as you said, Turkey is a NATO member, and any quote-unquote decision regarding the type of weapons, especially nuclear weapons, and the level of facilities, and even where these weapons should be stored, these are NATO's responsibility, not Turkey's alone. So I think this statement Mr. Fidan made is more about pressuring Iran to back down on the nuclear issue so that an agreement can be reached, and not that Turkey wants the atomic bomb. Even though Israeli newspapers have reported in detail that Turkey might pursue the atomic bomb if rivalries escalate, I think the concern that Turkey could acquire nuclear weapons is without NATO's knowledge is absolutely inconceivable. As I said, it's about pressuring the Islamic Republic to back down in ongoing negotiations. And there's another issue. Turkey was one of the candidate countries that, they mentioned, like Russia, where Iran's 400 kilograms of enriched uranium was supposed to go. Whether that's still on the table or not, we don't know. But this is also one of the reasons why Turkey wants to play a significant role in, the success of these negotiations taking place between Iran and the US.
It seems the Turks have become very active, especially in trying to prevent a military confrontation. What is Turkey's main interest in the Islamic Republic not perhaps falling? What are the Turks worried about? Are they worried about greater Israeli hegemony in the region? Are they worried about a wave of migration? What do you think their main concern is?
They have a set of concerns. You mentioned two outcomes, Israeli hegemony and a wave of migration from Iran. However, the reality remains that if you analyze the history of Turkey's recent progress since the Islamists rose to power, it has paralleled Iran's significant decline. Specifically, this indicates that a substantial sector of Turkey's industries and national economy has flourished precisely as a direct result of Iran's increasing isolation and subsequent economic dependence on Turkish trade channels and support. Turkey wants a weak Iran. It knows that the weaker Iran is, the more, quote-unquote, its refuge in Turkey will be. Its need for Turkey will be greater. Turkey will become the center for direct or indirect transactions that Iran is forced to conduct abroad. Turkey will, in any case, become a very important place for the Islamic Republic, and through that, Turkey will earn billions in revenue. That's one thing. Second, I think it's also very important culturally. Culturally, it's important because if the Iranian movement succeeds in triumphing against the Islamic Republic, and the vast majority of the people who triumph are in fact achieving victory against political Islam, this will be very influential for Turkey, standing as the flag bearer of political Islam among different countries. Even back when the woman life freedom movement was active, the Turks were very concerned that after all, a movement that had once succeeded in bringing an Islamic system to power now had all its people mobilized and working to dismantle this Islamic system. And culturally, I think this could impact not only Turkey, but also many neighboring countries. This explains the ironic quote-unquote solidarity and complicity found among Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, and Turkey, who all fear the potential collapse of the Islamic Republic. Firstly, from an economic standpoint, keeping Iran weak is advantageous for them. As you noted, Dubai has thrived by becoming the essential hub for Iran's most critical, direct or indirect, financial activities. Secondly, on a cultural level, the success of a genuinely non-Islamic movement would be incredibly costly, presenting an ideological threat that these nations are desperate to avoid. Thirdly, anyway, if any government, literally any administration that comes to power after this one was potentially a rival for them, it is because they haven't forgotten their memories from before the Islamic Republic, specifically recalling how, the Shah's regime used to look down on them with such disdain.
Mr. Sadrzadeh, before I let us go, I also want to ask you about Hakan Fidan's remarks regarding Marco Rubio's phone call with him. It has really confused many people how it's possible that if Mr. Fidan has truly spoken the truth, the US Secretary of State would send a signal to Tehran via Turkey on the eve of an attack on its most important Middle Eastern ally.
This is also, in fact, in line with what I mentioned, to put pressure on the Islamic Republic, telling them that you must, anyway, raise your hands and surrender on many issues. Regarding Fidan's statement about the atomic bomb, I trust Rubio really told him this, because I do not think Fidan would lie for Mr. Rubio. These pressures urge the Islamic Republic to abandon its last resistance, surrender, and accept our conditions. Apparently, America's terms are extremely difficult for the Islamic Republic to accept. I believe they are willing to compromise on the nuclear issue. Larijani agreed in Moscow to ship out 400 kilograms of uranium, and they are open to other concessions. But what is very important to them are America's demands regarding the missile issue, which they apparently cannot accept.
Thank you, Ali Sadrzadeh, Middle East Affairs Analyst from Frankfurt. A fabricated video published on Telegram channels close to the Revolutionary Guard simulates the arrest of reformist leaders. It depicts agents appearing at night by the beds of Javad Zarif, Hassan Rouhani, and Mohammad Khatami, showing them with terrified faces during the arrest. Finally, a text titled "Ashura-like reform" appears. Let's watch this video together. Jaber Rajabi, political analyst, has joined us. Mr. Rajabi, what do you think is the reason for publishing such a video now?
My endless greetings. Voices within the Islamic Republic and its fringes involving leaders like Khatami and Rouhani argue that the system can be reformed. You and I, along with the majority of people, know that this system cannot be reformed. A part of the government from within is trying to say that we want to reform to create change. They mostly give this message to foreigners. In the midst of this, I think they are sending this message to those who think, hey, don't even think about it. The Islamic Republic's form, its structure, its goals, they don't change. We know he came a long way, Khatami himself, whom they've now depicted in this way, he even issued statements for them. He did a lot of work for them. It seems the hardcore of power is sending a message amidst all the pressures and negotiations. It is signaling that if reformists are talking to outsiders and claiming they want to make changes, they will find that this wall is merely a dead end.
If you could briefly say, figures like Khatami himself, who, after these protests and killings, practically stood fully behind the government, what else do they have to worry about from them?
Their concern isn't that. They, always wait, hoping to get a piece of bread. Threatened by potential internal change, the Islamic Republic attempts to stifle threats in their infancy, while the first stage targets reformists. I believe this circle of suppression will eventually expand.
Thank you, Jaber Rajabi, political analyst, for being with us. And thank you for watching tonight's 24 program. Before the end of the program, let me say that in the past few minutes, U.S. President Donald Trump said in an interview with Axios that he might send another aircraft carrier towards Iran. Until the next program, farewell.